Hello and greetings, everyone. It is Adina from Immigrant Finance. I'm here today with our guest, Kevin of Deliberate English. Welcome, Kevin. How are you?
Thank you, Dina. I'm doing well, doing well. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Just to start us with a joke, I can't help but now think about we were just talking about how like our last names are the names of our businesses. I'm Adina Immigrant Finance and you're Kevin Deliberate English. And our little names under
Exactly.
the video. Yeah, it's so funny. Well, thank you for joining us. So, everybody, Kevin's here to talk to us about things that we can be doing to improve English skills in the sense of how that can help in the workplace and with finances. I'll just share Kevin's background a little bit and then turn it over to him to share more. So, Kevin helps international professionals and immigrants with an intermediate level of English speak more confidently at work. He's passionate about helping people naturally express themselves and get better jobs. As the founder of Deliberate English, he's built an online community designed to help busy professionals take their English to the next level faster through active, deliberate practice. And that's a great bio. Anything else you want to share?
Yeah, the main thing I would just add is, or really emphasize, is that confidence piece. And we're going to talk about that throughout the conversation today. But I've found, in working with clients and working with some of my immigrant friends and family, that it really is that confidence piece that tends to hold a lot of us back from taking that next step, from taking that next leap towards something better in our lives. And so a lot of what I want to make sure we cover today is, what can we be doing to build our confidence so that English is no longer a barrier to greater financial stability and greater financial health.
This is a very important topic, obviously, for this community. Something we have a lot of personal experience with in terms of when my husband immigrated here. He had a more heavy accent. He still has an accent, but that was definitely something that made him super insecure in the job world for a long time. I think it still does. So I really appreciate you bringing light to this topic and taking the time to have this conversation.
For
So
sure.
let's start off just telling folks about kind of what your connection is to the topic of immigration.
Yeah, for sure. And, honestly, like the topic of immigration and how I got into this business and language learning, it's all very much sort of linked together. So I'll kind of
Mhm.
just start quickly at the beginning and then kind of walk us through how all this fits together. So my background is actually in information technology and IT. And so I spent 12 years working in corporate jobs, mostly in the sales side. So I worked for a cybersecurity company and we sold software to large corporations. And my job was to give presentations to executives, to speak at conferences, to give demonstrations, and ultimately help sell millions of dollars in sales. That all sounds nice and fancy, right? But deep down, as I was doing all that stuff, I dealt and struggled a lot with imposter syndrome, right? This feeling that I'm a fraud, I don't really know anything. Why do people trust me to talk about this stuff? And just feeling like eventually someone's going to find out that I'm not really as good as they think I am. And around that same time, I was starting to say, hey, I want to try to learn a language too. I want to try to learn Spanish because living in Chicago, which is where I'm based, we have a very large immigrant community here. We have a lot of Spanish speakers here from various different Spanish speaking countries. And around that same time, my sister actually married an immigrant from Chile. And so I started to really have this desire to, hey, I want to connect more with my community. I want to connect more with my family. So I want to try to learn this language. Now, at the time, I had no idea how to learn languages, and this was very much a struggle. And as I started to slowly get into it, I started to feel like what it's really like to speak in a second language. You feel so weak sometimes. You feel like you're trapped and you can't express who you are because you don't have the right vocabulary. You're missing words, or you're afraid of the next question that somebody's going to ask you because you're not sure if you're going to understand it completely. And what if you answer it the wrong way? And now you feel embarrassed and ashamed. And so as I was starting to feel that, I thought back to my corporate job and I was like, man, if I was already so stressed with doing that in my native language, how much worse would it be? How much more stressful would it be if I had to do this in a second language? And so that's really where I started to have this idea. Okay, well, I have this corporate background, I have this business experience, I've gotten better at learning languages. Maybe there's an opportunity here to help people get past this hurdle, or to at least feel more confident when they are working. And so I looked into it even further because I imagined that there was some sort of financial connection here too. And I came across some studies, one in particular I really liked by EF Language First, that showed on average improvement in English skills from just an intermediate to an advanced level had around an 18% increase in typical expected salary across all industries, across all locations. And so that could go up, that could go down depending on where you're at in the job you're in. But clearly, an extra 20%, 18, 20% salary increase, that's significant
It's huge.
in a
Yeah.
lot of cases, right? And so
Huh.
kind of taking that a step further, then I said, okay, well, let me see if this makes sense to do this. So I started to work with my brother-in-law from Chile, who
Mm,
was just coming to the United States, had never worked in English before, had never worked in the US before. And
yeah.
I worked with him for a couple months, kind of just walking him through, hey, here's how to tackle interviews, here are things we can say. We practice working on those things together. And he went from, again, being super insecure, not confident at all in
Yeah.
his ability to speak and get a job, to actually getting a great one, making $60,000 a year as his first job in the United States as an
Wow,
admissions
that's
processor.
huge.
Yeah, and that was really a big proving moment to me. Like, wow, this is something that I can do to help people, and that really meant a lot more to me than my typical old corporate jobs, and is where I decided to then start delivered English, and here we are today.
Oh, that's such a beautiful story. I love that. Thank you for sharing. And it's really cool that you shared how you relate to that feeling from when you had your imposter syndrome in your own job, because that is what it feels like for sure.
Hmm.
From what I've seen, right? And also like my own experiences when we go to Ecuador, and like my
Hmm.
Spanish is not perfect, it's not amazing. And like I feel like that all the time. I can't imagine working there. We have those conversations sometimes where Mal will be like, Can you imagine like trying to apply to jobs in Ecuador, right? And like interview?"
Yeah. Sure. Yeah, it is crazy to think of how much more challenging that would be, right? And another thing that I kind of tested out there along with my brother-in-law was I started volunteering at our local high school here, where we
Mhm.
have a lot of Spanish speakers and immigrants, and I
Yeah.
would teach English every Saturday morning for like 4 hours to the parents of the high school students, and they were from like Ecuador and Honduras and
Mhm.
places like that, and just being able to speak with them, and seeing at first how there's almost like a guilt or a shame of just like, hey, I'm here but I just can't speak well, and there's like this just negative self-image.
Yeah.
That was another big motivating factor, like, hey, there is no reason for you to feel bad about yourself. You should feel
Right.
very proud of yourself, because doing anything in a foreign language is hard.
Yeah.
Living in a foreign language and having a job in a foreign language, that's very hard, and you should be very proud of yourself for as far as you've come. And now my job is to try to help you, feel even better about that. But it is very eye opening the more that you do work with immigrants, the more that you do work with people,
Mhm.
to see. You kind of mentioned this before we even started here. All the stuff they have to go through that we just take for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I mean, most people in the world never even try, right? It's like the really brave, courageous ones who do try
Hmm.
and then have to go through so much, on top of missing, your family back home, being a whole new culture, right? Having to learn the whole job market that's different, probably new
Hmm.
skills. A lot of people have to start over and
Right.
retrain in their fields because they don't get the certifications. Like the immigration law challenges alone. Oh my
Hmm.
gosh, the list goes on. So, question for you: it sounds like what you're doing is kind of a mix of the taking the English to the next level, but also is there a bit of the job training, navigation, interview skills that you work on too with people?
Yeah, so when I work with students, we're not just focused on like, hey, here's English grammar, here's some words, go memorize it, and we're going to have a test. Like, there's really none of that. Everything that I'm trying to do with people in my community is based on real world, real life scenarios. And so, for example, if we're talking about job interviews, sure, I'm going to teach some expressions on things that you can say, questions you might be asked. But I also like to add in some different, just like general strategies for those situations. So I was on a Facebook Live earlier today, and they asked like, hey, what's a common mistake that you see people make in job interviews, or English students make in job interviews? And the common one that I see both in native speakers and in English as a second language folks is we tend, when we're asked about our experiences, to just give the job description of our old job. We say, "Yeah, I worked in a call center and I talked to clients." Okay, cool. You told me about your old job, but what I was more interested in was you and what did you do to make it successful. And so, what I encourage my students to do is, instead of talking about tasks in your job interview, talk about outcomes. What are the results that you helped achieve? So, thinking back to that call center example, instead of saying I worked at a call center and I talked to clients, you might say I helped my call center achieve or improve customer satisfaction by 15%. And by simply sort of reframing it, we can now show, hey, I was part of a successful team. I know how to work in a successful team. We had this goal. I helped my team achieve it. And as the interviewer, maybe that's my goal too. Maybe my focus is increasing customer satisfaction. And knowing that you were a part of it and helped achieve it is much more interesting to me than you simply telling me that you worked in a call center. Right. So, yeah, definitely we cover both the English topics, but also some general strategies that we can use to be successful, whether it is in a job interview or it's giving presentations or recovering from mistakes in a presentation and stuff like that.
Mm. Oh, that's incredible because you're teaching people to leverage, their skills and sell themselves in a way they should, right? In a way that
Exactly.
they should be owning all the amazing things they've done, especially for folks in the immigrant community that I think you and I both know very well are some of the most hardworking, like trusted
Absolutely.
people, right? Like some of the best workers, like people would be so lucky to be able to have folks in this community working for them. And so sometimes there's just that gap of, like you identified, communicating like that amazing skill set you can offer, right? That
Mhm.
maybe not only English can get in the way, but just knowing how to talk about yourself and your
Right.
accomplishments, like that self-worth piece.
For sure. Yeah, and the fact that you mentioned the hardworking part, I think is a good point to add on to here as well, because obviously, as you mentioned, immigrants are super hardworking people, and so when it comes to English, it's not a question of not wanting to try or not being willing to put in the
Right.
effort. What I usually see as more of a problem is people just don't know where to invest their time, and how to invest their time in a way that leads to results or return on investment, to put it into a financial sense. And so one of the like common sort of myths that I see people fall into and believe around learning a language or learning English is this idea that, hey, if I just listen to a bunch of music in English, if I watch a bunch of TV series in English, if I listen to a bunch of podcasts, I'm going to get better, I'm going to improve. And there's a good reason why people believe that, is because if you go online and you look at forums and you look at people's comments, you'll always find people saying, yeah, I got fluent by listening to music. And so you say, cool, I like music. I can do that. Like, let me go listen to a bunch of music. But then what happens is you start to, I mean, at least if you're like me and, and many of the students I work with, you start to do that, and you're like, okay, been listening for a while now, but I don't really feel like I'm getting better. And then instead of thinking, okay, there's a problem with this technique, we tend to personalize that. We think, oh, well, it worked for that person on the internet. It's not working for me. I must be the problem. I have a learning problem. I don't have a good memory. There's something wrong with this. And if I can't learn this, then how am I going to apply for that next job? And so, like I said, it's not a question about not being willing to put in the effort, but it's more about we need to find different ways of practicing our English and studying our English that have a higher return on investment than simply the passive listening and the passive practice that we're so often led to believe is, this magical way to learn a language.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really, really excellent point that you're making. And I think is will hopefully be liberating for people to hear. it's similar with the learning about finances. Like, it's not your fault you weren't taught it by your parents who weren't taught it, and that they don't
Right.
teach it in school, right? Like, it's not your fault. So sometimes you just have to get redirected and get the right guidance of to use your time best, right? So that you can get the
Right.
results you want. Exactly. Yeah, and that makes me think of something we were talking about before we hit record of like, this is also unfair, right? That people have to conform and assimilate and have to speak English, right, to be
Mhm.
successful in many ways. I mean, you could be successful in this country without knowing English, but it is harder.
Mhm.
So like, I know we wanted to just acknowledge that too, that that's not fair for people. And yeah, what are your thoughts on kind of that topic and doing the work?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the, how it is unfair, I mean, I completely agree. I mean, the fact that the world, whether we like it or not, caters to English speakers is kind of crazy. Like the fact that you as an American can go travel abroad and pretty much anywhere you go, you're going to find people that speak English, signs are in English, menus are in English, everything's in English for you. Like it's really unfair. We were truly spoiled, and I think that leads to a lot of like this monolinguistic culture. And we're in
Right.
America. If you're a Native American born person, you only speak English, and there's no incentive for you to speak anything else. And I think on a world level, that's very weird, right? That's very strange. In most countries, people speak at least two languages because of English, and so that does increase that difficulty level. It's like, if we're at a race, you see this analogy a lot. We're running a race. We're not all starting at the same starting line, right? Like if you already speak English, you're like 5 steps ahead of everyone else before you even begin the race. So, with that in mind, I think it's even more important for people. If you do have an opportunity, if you do have the skills, like I happen to find out in my case, to be able to help people make up for that difference in a shorter amount of time, that we certainly take advantage of that. And again, that is a huge part of the reason why I wanted to learn Spanish in the first place, because I didn't want to be just another American who could only wanted to speak one language, but also to use that experience to try to improve the lives of others who are starting at a disadvantage, especially from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully the country's going in a way where it will be the same for Spanish someday, where in order to be successful, you have to know Spanish as well. I really hope we're
Mhm.
going in that direction. And the way the population changes are happening, demographics, it looks like that may be the case. Um, I was just looking today at, but I think by year 2045, the state of
Mhm.
Florida is projected to be about 35% Latino,
Wow.
which is like getting up there, right? It's awesome.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I mean, it's definitely more than that currently in some parts of Florida, but but in terms of the whole state, so things are definitely changing. Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that too. It's similar with like capitalism and learning about finances, right? Like, we can acknowledge that these systems and the way these power structures are messed up and related to and consequences of colonialism and all of this. We can acknowledge that and have discussions about it and question it, and right, but you can hold all that while also doing what's best for you and your family. And at this moment, like learning English and learning about finances and understanding how the system work and how to access those skills in the fastest way you can, like you're saying, is going to give you more financial opportunities, right? Yeah, what do you
Absolutely.
think on that point?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. Is that the one of the fastest ways, I guess, to start to take that next step in your career, at least in the United States, is to boost those English skills, or even just, I mean, a lot of people I meet already have pretty solid English skills, but they just, going back to what I said at the beginning, they lack the confidence. They think that, I'm still not good enough. I'm not going to apply for that job. When really I'm listening to them and I'm talking to them and I'm like, apply for that job. You already have it. Like you know it. but I think it goes back to, again, these negative feelings of self-image, of self-worth that happen because of the way that we're sort of treating our English studies. So, again, thinking back to that passive practice standpoint, right? Like, I'm doing this, I'm not improving fast. Clearly, there's something wrong with me. I don't trust my English. When really, what I like to kind of relate this to when we think about, how to start getting out of that cycle and how to start building our confidence, I like to relate this to playing the piano or playing an instrument. So imagine, Adina, that you play piano, you're an intermediate level, you can play songs, you're not a beginner, you play pretty well, you're not a professional, but you're solid, right? You can play music. And now, for some reason, next week you have to give a concert to 1,000 people. And so if you think about that situation, what do you think is going to help you prepare more for that concert? Are you going to go on YouTube and watch videos about playing piano? Or are you going to go on Netflix and watch a documentary about giving concerts? Or are you going to sit in front of your piano and practice like crazy for the next week? I mean,
Right. Practice.
obviously,
Yeah.
the answer there is to practice. But
Yeah.
in the language learning world, we tend to skip that step. What
Mhm.
happens is giving a concert is speaking and having a conversation with a native speaker. But instead of sitting at that piano and practicing, we go watch a video, or we watch a few
Oh,
videos, or listen to some music. So we're skipping that sort of
yeah.
active, deliberate practice step, which is all about spending focused time on things that you still don't feel comfortable doing, that are
Yeah.
still difficult to you and challenging to you. Because again, if
Uh,
you're learning a song for the first time, you don't know anything about it, right? It's very hard the first time you try to learn a song. It's super slow. You're going one note at a time. But then the
Yeah.
more you practice that, the faster you go. And so that's really where we need to start getting to from a language learning perspective, is say, hey, yeah, I have to give this concert next week because I have a presentation or I have a job interview or I need to talk to some clients. Now I need to sit down at the piano, or I need to sit down with myself
Right.
and work on my English in a deliberate, active way.
It's a really good analogy. Why do you think that is the case in this area?
Because deliberate practice is hard and it feels painful at first.
Yeah.
And so both in language learning and I think in online business too, as I'm sure
Yeah.
you can relate, these are things that are longer term
Yeah.
gains. And so that means that all of the pain is now and all
Right.
of the benefit is in the future.
Yeah.
And as humans, we're not really good with that. Like we
Yeah.
like more instant gratification. We want
Right.
to see success. We want to feel good about it. But knowing that, hey, before I can feel great about my English, before my business grows and takes off, there's gonna be a period of time where it feels like a challenge. It feels like a battle.
Mhm.
That's hard for a lot of people to really come to terms with or accept. And so I think because of that, that's why people tend to shy away from this deliberate
Yeah.
practice stuff, and they go for stuff that's easier, like watching a video, because you understand 70% of that video, you feel good about yourself, there's some sort of reward from doing that activity that's more instantaneous than the long-term benefits that you're going to get from practicing in a deliberate way.
Mhm. This is such a gem you're sharing. I think that applies to so many things in life. I just really want to underscore how important this is. Yeah, I think we take the easy way out in lots of things, and when it comes to finances, like I think of budgeting. If you've never budgeted before, getting that habit of like every month working on your budget, checking in with your budget, moving things around and adjusting to what happened in life that obviously, is going to happen and throw you off, and learning how to modify other categories, learning how to build the habit. It's a lot of habit building of
Mhm.
paying yourself first, of saving, of starting to invest, right? It's so similar. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense that with language we don't do that. And you are really challenging me in a good way to work on deliberate Spanish practice. Do you have any advice for people who want to improve their Spanish? Because we have a lot of people in our community who
Mhm.
are also U.S. citizen children of immigrants, and might
Mhm.
understand everything but not be able to speak it well.
Mhm.
That typical thing with immigrant children. You can like
Yeah.
hear it but not speak it.
hmm Yeah, so I actually do have a sister business called Deliberate Spanish, which is focused on
Okay. Very cool.
yeah. So I'm actually a customer of that one too. Yeah, all the strategies that we'll talk about here in a little bit too. These are universal language learning tips, right? So whether you are trying to learn Spanish, whether you're trying to learn English or French, what I'm trying to promote here and what I'm trying to spread the message about is like, hey, there is a better way to practice. There is a more effective way to practice.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, it's going to feel harder in the beginning, but it is going to have longer term results. And one of the best, I think, proof points of that is just myself as a case study, because as I mentioned, when I first started to learn Spanish, I was just doing the easy stuff, right? I was going on apps, I was clicking buttons, I was listening to some music and stuff. And so I went to Spain for that first time. I decided, hey, I'm going to try to talk to people and see what happens. And I still remember, like, the very first thing I did was I went to a restaurant. I asked for a table for two, and then when we sat down and the waitress came up to me, started talking, and I was just like shocked. Like, I didn't understand anything. I had no idea how to respond. I felt so just insecure and just so frustrated. Like, I've been studying and it didn't work, and nothing's
Yeah.
happening here. But then after that experience, when I came back, I sort of came across this whole deliberate practice thing and the whole deliberate Spanish front. And after figuring out the different techniques, which again we'll talk about here in a little bit, um, I was able to, within just another year and a half, 2 years, go back to Spain for like an immersion week, and I spent the entire week speaking 100% Spanish, zero English, and was just fine. And I actually just got back from a trip from Spain doing the same thing again, where I spent 2 weeks
Nice.
there speaking entirely in Spanish. And that
Wow.
doesn't mean that I'm perfect. I don't ever make any mistakes, or like
Right.
sometimes certain accents still throw me for a loop or whatever.
Yeah.
But it just shows that, yeah, this is possible. And I don't think I'm anyone special. Like, I'm just a guy. I'm just a guy who was interested in language. But because I was able to start practicing the right way, I
Right.
was able to change that, "Oh my god, I don't know anything they're saying to me or how to respond," to, "Yeah, I can live a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month in a foreign language and be okay," right?
Yeah.
And so that's my goal, is to help other people experience that same transformation by doing similar things.
I mean, it makes sense. There's a reason why immersion is so successful. And like whenever I study Spanish here, I get nowhere. But when we go to Ecuador for a few weeks, like all of a sudden I go up a level, right? And
Mhm.
it just comes so much easier. So that's really exciting to hear. And I look forward to hearing more about deliberate Spanish because I could probably benefit from it myself. Do you want to go ahead and tell some of the techniques you were mentioning for folks?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Um, and so like, I think kind of the best way to just sort of dive into them is to really kind of look at it from another case study perspective. So I started working with this one client late last year, where she's from Eastern Europe, and she works in English, but she sort of came to me talking about how nobody at work likes to talk to me. They try to avoid speaking with me. I feel like I just can't communicate in a clear way. I ramble, because of all this, like, my relationships at work suffer. And so I sort of asked her a little bit, okay, well, what have you been doing so far? What have you been trying to do to improve? And she says, well, I've taken a bunch of courses. They're mostly like video lessons, and we have conversations and stuff with speakers. But again, thinking back to that piano analogy, I thought, okay, well, she's giving concerts and she's watching documentaries about concerts, but she's still not working on those things to actually practice it. And so, what I started to do with her in the deliberate English community was we would start doing these biweekly challenges, where I would give her sort of this real world situation. Hey, this week I want you to try to write an email to an angry client, or this week I want you to practice giving a voicemail, or today I want you to explain something complicated to me. And by doing this, I'm forcing her to step out of her comfort zone and use different expressions, use different sentence structures and things that feel difficult to her, right? It's this deliberate practice, right? And so as she's going through and doing this, she's making a lot of mistakes. And that's exactly what we want, because those mistakes allow us to sort of build a custom lesson and custom coaching for you. It helps us discover, okay, what are the areas that are still problematic, and we can focus on those. And so by going through this repeated process of, hey, we're going to collect some new expressions, we're going to try using them in a way we're not used to, but then getting that instant feedback, that's what's allowed her to sort of go from this, hey, nobody wants to talk to me, to telling me, a few weeks ago, like, hey, my relationships at work have improved a ton. What we've been doing here, I've been using in my job right away. And, let's keep going because this is great. And so when we
Amazing.
think about what are some things that the people that are listening today can start to do, um, I sort of have a little 2-day sequence plan that they can do here. And so, it all starts with this idea of like automatic time investments, just like you might have automatic investments in your own finances and investing, right? And the idea is that, whatever plan you want to do, the best plan is the one that you can do consistently and you can stick to, right? And that's true for budgeting, that's true for saving, that's also true for language learning. And so, we tend to think, oh, I need to practice through 2, 3, 4 hours a day to have results. No, I just need you to do something consistently. So my recommendation is to find 15 to 20 minutes, a 15 to 20-minute window where we can do some deliberate practice. And to me, the best time to do that is in the morning before you go to work or before you go to school. And the reason being is, like, you can imagine, if I say, hey, at 8 p.m. today, I'm going to do my 20 minutes of English. What if you had a really bad day at work? What if your boss was a jerk? What if your kids got sick? What if you had to make an emergency visit somewhere, or you had to get some grocery shopping in? But by the time 8 o'clock comes, do you really have energy to do this anymore? Versus in the morning, that's the one time a day before the world has really gotten to you yet, before things have changed. And sure, you might have a bad night's sleep. You're not going to 100% do this every day. But if you can increase the odds of you doing something consistently from 20% when you're doing it at 8 p.m. to 80% when you're doing it in the morning, that's a huge win, right? So step one, find 15 to 20 minutes in your day, ideally in the morning, to set aside for some deliberate practice. Now, what are we going to do at that time? What are we going to do that's going to help us actually improve? So this is where that little 2-day sequence comes in. So on day one, what I would recommend that you do is you pick a video that you're interested in. And then for 20 minutes, I just want you to push play, listen to a sentence, and push pause. And then I want you to repeat that sentence out loud from memory. That's it. That's a very simple technique, but it's very powerful because repeating something out loud forces our brain to pay attention to the sounds and the words that it usually ignores. If you hear a word for the first time that you've never heard before and you don't know what it means, your brain just forgets it, right? It ignores it. And so we don't want those things to get past us. We don't want to forget that stuff. And by listening to that sentence, pausing, repeating it out loud, that's going to help us pay more attention to the things we usually ignore. Now, the last thing I'll say about that, and I'll pause for a second here then, is just as you're repeating these sentences, you're going to find that there are times where you keep stumbling and there's this one word that you just can't remember to say every time, or there's like these two words. And when that happens, I want you to write that sentence down, because that shows that, hey, there's a blind spot here. There's something that I'm not comfortable using yet that I can improve, and it's going to help me improve faster. So, day one, pick a video, pause after every sentence, repeat out loud, and then just write down the parts that were hard for you. Okay?
Got it. This sounds exactly like how my 2.5-year-old is learning to talk. Like,
There's a lot of similarities.
yeah,
Yeah.
and she's bilingual. She's learning English and Spanish, and she's doing this. So it feels very intuitive and
Right.
mimicking how humans learn language.
Right. When you're a kid and you're learning your language, like you said, you're repeating what you hear your parents say, you're making mistakes, your parents correct you, and then you try it again, right?
Exactly.
Like it's not rocket science. Like you don't need to, like I said, spend 5 hours a day figuring this stuff out, or have like a
Right.
degree in English learning to do it. It's just these are things that we just, for some reason, like I said, because it's maybe a little more work, it's a little more painful, we just tend to ignore, and we
Yeah.
try to go for the easy things like I'm just going to play a video on Netflix,
Yeah,
right?
and with kids, they don't know to feel ashamed, right? So they just mess up so much and then they learn so fast. They learn so many
Right,
new words every day because of it.
right.
So maybe having that mindset can be helpful.
Exactly. And that plays in perfectly to that second day of the 2-day sequence then is so day 1, we collected all of these things that were hard for us and difficult for us and we made mistakes with. And then on day 2, what I recommend that you do is you simply sit down and write a short 100-word story. That's like 2 paragraphs about whatever, a conversation you're going to have with your boss that day, something that you're excited about doing on the weekend, your next trip that you're planning on doing. But the idea is that when you're writing that short little story, you want to try to use at least one of those things that was hard for you the day before. Because just like you said with your kid, they made a mistake and then they go ahead and use that same thing right away, right? The
Yeah,
next minute, the next hour, whatever, they keep trying it. And that's what I'm trying to get people to do
got
here too
it.
is instead of shying away, oh, I didn't understand that sentence. I didn't understand that word. I'm just going to ignore it and avoid it. No, that thing that you didn't understand, that's exactly the thing that you do need to work on and the thing
Right.
you do need to try to use the next day when we're doing this stuff.
Yep.
Um, it's,
It's
yeah.
the thing with
A-
finances, again, like, whatever is feeling really uncomfortable is probably what you need to pay attention to.
Exactly. Right, because it's really through it's through those painful moments, right, that you really experience growth.
Yes.
um, Whether that's in your understanding of finance, whether that's in your understanding of language, because if you're always just doing what you're comfortable doing, you're going to always get the results that you've had so far, right?
Yeah.
um,
Yeah,
so it's that
absolutely.
growth mindset, I guess.
Yes. Exactly. And it's I'm sure the same, that people who are, like, health experts would say about exercise and eating well and all of that.
Yeah, for sure. Just to close that thought too, the last thing that I would recommend that people do after they do that using of those difficult things in that short story is to just send it off for some feedback from a native speaker.
Mm,
That can be a friend if you have one who's willing to do it, but even if you don't know anybody to help you with your English, there's free resources out there. One that I particularly like is called highnative.com, where you can just go and you can just post a question to a community of native speakers. You can do it for Spanish too, if you're interested in doing that. I use it all the time. But you
nice.
just post your little story out there and you say, hey, does this sound natural? And then within like an hour or 2 hours, people will respond to you and they'll tell you, hey, yeah, this sounds good, or no, I wouldn't use it that way. And that's part of that feedback going back to your 2 year old that they're getting from you as a parent. You can replicate that same process with your English and with your language learning as well by using a simple free tool like that.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing that resource. I will link that below. I just pulled it up and
Yeah,
it looks very helpful.
for sure.
Yeah, I appreciate that. These are amazing tips. Really, really grateful for you sharing this with our community. Is there anything else you would want to add about just kind of the intersection with English language learning and the financial impact, or just anything for the immigrant community that you want people to hear?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just, in order to increase, that financial stability to work towards a more, I guess, equitable future and all of that is you really need to find a way to get yourself into sort of a feedback loop. And what I mean by that is we tend to be our own worst enemies from this perspective. And I think as we were mentioning earlier, we tend to sort of start to feel bad about ourselves when we think that we're not progressing enough. And because of that, if it's with English, we say, hey, I'm still not ready to apply for that next job. Like, hey, I know I need more money. I want to increase my salary, but I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. I'm not ready yet. And so to me, that's really the point of all this English stuff is it's just a tool, right? Like nobody wants to just speak English. They want to get a better job, right? They want to improve their financial situation. And so if you want to get past this idea of English as a roadblock and you want to start viewing it as, hey, just the tool that I can use to achieve my financial goals and my career goals. Getting into a feedback loop with someone who can give you that sort of consistent feedback, telling you, hey, you messed these things up, but this is better. But hey, this is better. Hey, this is better. That's what you really need, is that external sort of stimulus from someone to know that you're making progress. Because when you're just by yourself, it's really hard to see that progress, and you tend to be a little more pessimistic. And then that leads us to allowing English to be that hurdle in our financial situation. So
Yeah.
finding a way to be in a feedback loop, that's specifically what I've built in the Deliberate English community. If anyone wants to check it out, you can go to deliberatenglish.com and grab a free copy of my ebook there, where I talk about all of this stuff. But one way or another, whether it's with me or someone else, you just got to get out of this lone wolf mode, this being by yourself mode, and get with people who can show you your progress, so that you start to say, hey, my English is good enough to go take that next step in my career, to go improve my financial standing, instead of using it as an excuse to not get started.
That's great advice. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yeah, if people want to learn more, what's the best way to contact you, learn more about your website, social media?
Yeah, so the best way to get in touch is definitely through deliberateenglish.com. And so when you go there and when you grab that ebook, 3 Steps to Speak More Confidently at Work, that'll put us in touch via email. And then it'll be a good opportunity to get to know each other, to understand a little bit more about what are your true goals, right? Like, if you imagine yourself a year in the future, what do you want out of your life? And again, that's going to be more than just speak English, right? It's going to be, hey, I want to apply for a new job. I want to change careers. And with that in mind, we'll be able to work towards some sort of solution to help you get there.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kevin. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, just that, I really appreciate the time. I really appreciate you allowing me to speak to your audience here. I hope that some of these comments have maybe inspired some people or encouraged some people to really sort of work to get out of this vicious cycle, right, of not being able to achieve what they want because they feel English is holding them back. And so anything that I can do, let me know. If you have any audience members that have questions or need additional help, just let me know, and I'm happy to do that.
Definitely. Thanks for taking the time. You've shared a lot of really valuable insights and encouragement. I think I'm hoping a lot of people are going to feel inspired after this, that if this is an issue that has held them back, that there's things that they can do, even just with the quick tips you gave. I'm
Mhm.
definitely going to try that with Spanish. So thank you for your time and energy. And we look forward to continuing to have you part of the immigrant finance community and collaborate.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks, Kevin.